we are going to talk a little bit about the wheel from start to finish. All right, so this is my wheel and I have it plugged in. When it's not being used, it needs to be unplugged, and then you can kind of store the cord. The stool can go upside down on the wheel head as long as it's not plugged in, because we don't want anyone coming by, flipping on the switch, and sending that stool flying across the room. So it's very, very important to make sure that the wheel is always unplugged when you're not using it. The power should also be turned off, but obviously cutting the power with the cord will make sure nothing happens. We also make sure that we always leave a bat on the unused wheel. That's sort of our rule here in the studio, because of the bolts that are here on the wheel head are very dangerous. And if a child or someone who wants to goof up comes by and turns this thing on, those rotating bolts could be incredibly dangerous. The best thing for the stool is not to have it back here so you're sitting like this, because when you're on the wheel, you need to use your core, and that's not going to be over the wheel. So you want to get it close, depending on your frame. But the idea really is to get your body up and over the pot. So it's almost like you're laying on top of it. But that's how you get your frame to be working on the pot. And different size people are going to be sitting in different positions. But if you're struggling, it could be because you're not close enough to the pot. Now, our wheels are set at one height. If you have a wheel in your own studio, you have the ability to adjust the legs or your stool to get it to your height. Here in the studio, you'll have to make do. If you find that you're struggling with your non-pedal foot, sometimes bringing in a brick to put your foot on helps if you're a smaller person, so that you feel like you can have your foot braced, because the pedal over here is going to be a bit of a raised mechanism that's going to allow your other non-pedal foot to feel like it's kind of failing. For me, I'm fine. I have longer legs. I usually just kind of my foot ends up rolling up into my toes, and it's whatever's comfortable for you. You have to find what fits for you. Everybody is built differently. Now, the pedal has to be positioned so that it's not awkwardly far away from the wheel where you're stretching out your leg, or it's too close where it's in the way. Find it where you feel like you're most comfortable in a relaxed position. Now, these two holes on the bat, they're designed to go into the holes. And we have round bats here. Some are slightly smaller than others. This one covers the entire wheel head, which is the metal piece. And then I'm going to actually show you the pan here, which is attached. It's meant to come apart. It actually has two levers on each side that you just sort of push down evenly and then just kind of rock it, and that rocks it off. The back piece is on a thread, so you have to turn it from side to side and wiggle it out of the thread. Now imagine if this pan is full of water, what a hot mess that's going to be. So what I do is, if I have a lot of water in the pan, I get a sponge in a bucket and I bail out some of the water, because the sponge will soak up the water, and I bail it into a bucket before I pull this off, because you are going to need to empty this pan when you are done throwing. You do not dump all the water into the recyclable barrel. The water can go in the sink, the clay goes in the barrel, or the clay goes home with you or in your locker, because that's your clay to recycle if it's your clay. You may have to scoop clay out of the pan before you dump the water. Wendy is the only one that will be putting water in that barrel. She'll be adding water as she feels necessary. Not saying that you can't put water in there. If you've got a little bit of water like a slurry, it needs to go in there, not down the sink. We don't want the clay going down the sink. We do have a clay trap, but the best way clay traps function is they're like garbage disposals. You don't inundate them with garbage. You do your best to just let them be the second defense to protect your pipes and your plumbing. So when this is all cleaned, that you should clean these and put them back on the wheel. And it doesn't matter if they're damp. Okay, they're going to dry. It's a pottery studio. This piece I always put on first, because then I can wind the threads like so. And then I usually will sit down and just pop that one down until it locks into place. And then get it centered so that it's not way back or way up, but it's centered. And if it's not on those threads, it's not going to snap together. And that's going to be pretty watertight. But when they do get really full, sometimes they do leak. And that's when you know you better be bailing out some water. Okay, this is my pan of water that I'm going to use today. Using a small container or shallow water, I think makes throwing a little bit harder. I think that I like to be able to get my hand all the way submerged. So if your water is just real shallow and you're just cutting your fingers halfway in there, I would get a larger pan. You don't want one that's super deep and tall either, because you got to be able to reach. Also, my personal preference is to use warmer water. Okay, cold water can make your hands get kind of cold and kind of stiff. Especially if the clay has been sitting around the studio, even in the wintertime, it's going to pick up the ambient temperature of the room. So the clay is much cooler to the touch. And so by using warmer water, it really makes the throwing process much more enjoyable. Now, you want to get your clay into a good ball. And if you're using clay that has come out of the bags, it's already gone through a pug mill. So most of the air has been pushed out. So it's pretty well condensed. You don't have to do a lot of wedging. If you're using recycled clay, you should wedge your clay well before using it on the wheel. And getting it in a good ball that doesn't have big, deep fingerprints is a really good way to get this clay prepared. Do not slather your bat with water, because then this is just going to slide off. Some potters use a little bit of water. I personally don't mind a dry bat. I find it sticks well. If you've thrown a pot before this one and it has failed, you can cut that mess off your bat. You do not need to scrape the clay off. That pad of clay makes a good place to put your next ball of clay to keep on going. And if you really get into throwing, I would suggest investing in, maybe the smaller square bats, where if you want to come in here and throw 8 pots, you don't have these big bulky round ones all over the place. The square ones are usually like 8 or 9 inches. If you're doing, smaller pots, you can line them up and they dry nicely, and those are awesome. All right, slap it down in the middle. Get your foot ready to go. I always like to get it nice and wet before I start. Get my wheel going. I'm going to start out at a medium speed. Get my hands in position. I'm going to lock this elbow into my hip so I can kind of lean in. And this hand here is going to go on top. And I'm going to kind of just lean in, and I'm adjusting my speed. Now I want to sometimes create kind of a bit of a seal at the base here, because your clay can pop off. So I'm going to lean in, use the palm of my hand to push this part, and then this part coming down with my shoulder. I'm using my frame, and I'm going to pick up the speed, and I'm pushing this into the center. That's called pushing it into the center. The next part is coning. I'm going to use the pads of my hand, but I'm using my shoulders just like wings to push. It's all in the shoulders, people. There's no work in the arms here. It's all in the shoulders to push this clay in. And as I need it, I'm going to keep adding water, and I'm going to bring this up into a cone. And once it's in a cone, I'm going to support it with my left hand, because that's my non-dominant hand, and my right hand, because I'm right-handed, is going to be pushing down, kind of folding over what I call the mushroom. And this kind of creates, it kind of cycles it in and out. And you'll notice that I keep scooping and adding water, because you need to keep that clay slippery, because you don't want any friction. So I would really love you to note how much I add water. I'm going to cone it again. Centering takes a lot of practice, people. So don't feel discouraged if you're struggling. It is nothing that really comes super easily. And that, if you're having a hard time getting it pushed in and centered like that, some people I find struggle with that step. As long as you can do the coning, you should be able to get it pretty centered. But the 3 steps combined is what really gets that clay centered. You're turning it inside out so that the clay on the inside is not dry and the clay on the outside is sludging. If you over process your clay when you're centering and you're only really working that clay on the outside and the clay on the inside doesn't get cycled around, you're going to end up with kind of a sludgy surface and a very hard center. Our clay is centered, and we're ready to begin throwing the pot. Now again, if you overwork the clay, you're going to end up with something that's not quite right for throwing. But if you're trying to be hesitant to not add too much water, that doesn't allow you to have slippage that you need to get that thing centered. So don't be afraid to use the water. It's a lubricant, okay? And you'll find that The only time your pot is getting overworked is when you're working on it for a long period of time. And you can step away and let a pot firm up. You could take the blow dryer to it. You can stiffen it up and get right back on it. Take it off the wheel, set it aside, bring it back. Drying time always adds to bring that stability back if you really don't want to lose that pot and you've overworked it. Okay, now for throwing. And I want to just point out that I am right-handed, so my wheel is going counterclockwise, clockwise. And if you are left-handed, your wheel will be going clockwise. Some potters find out they're pretty ambidextrous. So when they get on the wheel, they say, well, I'm right-handed, but it feels awkward. I feel better if I do it this way. Whatever works for you, the sky is the limit. What I'm going to teach you are basics. The first thing we need to do is create a target hole so we know where to drill. And so again, adding water, hands on both sides, elbows anchored. A lot of times we tend to want to anchor our elbows on our knees, and that's fine. But I've learned as a potter that you want to get them anchored into your ribs. They can rest on your knee because your body is going to be lifting. And if your elbows are down here, you cannot lift your arms, and you're doing everything in the wrists, and that limits your range of motion. So I'm going to lock them into my ribs, get my hands down here, even though they're resting on my knees, 2 thumbs in the middle, and I'm going to create a small target. I don't want to go terribly deep because I'm not drilling the hole. I want to create a place to drill. Now, I've seen a number of potters that use their thumbs to drill. And personally, I'm not a fan because if they drill with their thumbs aren't as long as their fingers, okay? And that creates sometimes more of a slope. And if you're doing a bowl, a sloped hole is great. But if you're doing a cup, you need to really get down there and get a nice flat bottom. And so as you progress in your throwing, you will find that different pots kind of require a different approach. Like with a plate or a real shallow dish, I would basically be just using my fist and kind of pulling it out and flattening it as I go. I wouldn't really drill at all. But the basic essential of throwing always starts with being able to throw the basic cylinder. And the cylinder, a good cylinder, is 7 inches tall with a wall that's 1/4 inch thick. And you can throw that. You can learn to throw about anything. So my support hand is just going to kind of ride here. I'm going to use 2 fingers so that they're supporting one another. I'm going to bend my wrist so I'm going straight down. None of this flat wrist stuff and flat finger stuff. And at this point, I am going to rest my elbow on my leg, and I'm going to drill that hole. And as I get about halfway down, it's getting dry, so I'm going to add more water. There goes my sponge. And I'm going to go down to where I feel like I'm about 1/4 inch from the bottom. I have no idea how far I am from the bottom now. So I'm going to take my needle tool. I'm going to stick it in, ride my finger down the needle tool until I hit the bottom, and then I can tell how thick it is. And that's a little bit too thick. That's about 1/2 inch. I want it to be about 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to give it another little push, and that should be about right. Now I'm going to lay these fingers in there, get those elbows locked into my rib cage with my support hand, and I'm going to slowly open up my pot. Notice your wheel speed is moving pretty good during the drilling and the opening process. And I want to really sweep the bottom of the pot with my fingers so I get a nice smooth bottom. A lot of beginners end up with a bottom that is just a lot of ridges. But you want to get that bottom nice and smooth. And that takes a little bit of practice. And you can use your sponge to compress it. All right, so there we go. And now I'm ready to pull up my wall. And if you've got kind of a bulging pot, you can just collar it with these 2 hands. And notice that my elbows are always braced. Never do I have chicken arms out here. And get that nice and smooth so that my wall is more up and down. When you're opening up your pot, you really want this wall right here to be kind of perpendicular for the pull. So if it isn't, straighten it out. Get your sponge in there. Get everything tidy on the inside as best you can before you start pulling up your walls. Now, it is said that if you're making a very large pot, that you might have an arm way out here when you're pulling up. You may have seen the potters on YouTube. Arms are up in the air because this pot is enormous. There's no way their elbows are going to be in here. They might even be standing, pulling up. But that is because they're using their entire frame. So as you're a beginner and you're learning and you're wrapping those arms up into your ribs and you're using your frame, you start to learn and understand the stability that all has to be up in your upper body. To get ready for the pull, thumbs crossed and your fingers crossed. Now make your wings go straight down. Now your elbows, tuck them into your ribs, and I'm scooching forward. Lean your body in. I'm actually got my hands where they're going to come right into my chest. I want to be up and down from my pot. I use a sponge when I throw on the outer hand. So now my thumb is just going to touch that hand so that way they're connected. There always has to be some touching so they're working together as a unit. If they're separate from each other, then you're not going to have them working as a unit. So if you're not using a sponge, you're going to be like this. If you're using a sponge, you're going to grab onto your sponge. Your inside hand, and now the wheel is slowing down a bit, is going to push in. So you can see, I'm going to get the water out, that I've actually created a valley here where my finger has gone into the wall. And the sponge on the outside is going to be pushing the wall inward while the inside fingers are going to grab onto that wall and pull the wall up. So I'm going to get it wet. I'm going to keep that pressure the same, and I'm just going to pull the clay upward slowly. The wheel is going slower. My hands are going slower. If I need more water, you add it, and then you keep on going. Nice and steady. Okay? Now again, my elbows are going to, I got a little bit of clay riding around there. My elbows can be locked into my rib cage. So that way when I'm pulling this wall up, I can pull my body up. If they're here, everything's in the wrist, and that's going to cause me to lose my pot. So lock them into your ribs, lean over your pot, give it another squeeze, keep the pressure the same all the way up as you're pulling the pot up. When you get to the rim, very patiently, allow the rim to slide through your fingers. Don't pull your hands away rapidly. And then you end up with, a crooked, crazy rim. And if your rim is crooked or your pot is at all off, the crookedness is going to come to the top and you can cut that away. The standard needle tool works, but you can even purchase one that's thinner. And I've even seen people use the dental floss that's on the little hooks. That's like a new hack. All right, now this is pretty thin all the way up. So now I'm just going to shape my pot, always adding more water. This time I'm going to kind of lean it because this is the part where you have to decide what shape you want your pot to be. And then I'm just going to flare out the rim a little bit. So now this wooden knife is really nice, but I'm actually going to cut into this base. And my inside hand is going to slide in so that the knife slides down, and I follow the contour of the pot. Not going too fast, but I got to hold this knife very steadily, cutting away that excess clay at the base. The reason you want to cut that excess clay away is because when you go to trim your pot, you're going to have a lot of clay at that base because you need to have a bit of a base in order to create a pot in the first place. So look how much clay I cut away. As you begin as a beginner, you're not going to be cutting away as much. You'll just do a tiny bit because that step will be very intimidating. All right, pot's done. Bottom's still a little rough, but we're going to do that through the trimming process. And since this is just sort of an introductory to pottery, if you were to trim this, you're going to let this get leather hard, turn it upside down on the wheel. You can go online and find different ways to anchor your pot. And with tools, when it's leather hard, you can trim and finish the foot on the bottom. And we're going to wire this off. So when you wire it, you're going to get your fingers down to hold this down tight, pull towards you to get that wired off. And you can do it twice if you like. Once is usually good. But remember, when this pot is off drying somewhere else in the studio, you want to make sure that you wire it off again before you remove it, or you could take the bottom right off your pot. Sometimes the bats are tricky to get off. And then voila, you've got a pot. Your pot can stay on the bat until it is leather hard. You want to keep an eye on them. You want it to air dry most of the day. Maybe before you leave the studio, drape plastic over it lightly so that the rim doesn't continue to get too dry because the bottom is going to dry very slowly. The next day, you're going to come in, wire it, get it off the bat. It's leather hard. Then you'll use a scraper to scrape off that pad of clay that's left behind into either your personal clay stash or into the barrel. You'll clean your bats and store them over there on the other side of the room. and I'm going to put that into the clay barrel, or I'm going to recycle that into my own private collection. I'm checking it out here. There's nothing in my barrel, my bucket. I've checked. I'm doing a sweep. If there's chunks of clay in here, I'm going to pull those out, throw them into the clay barrel, and then all of this will go over to the sink if it's just water. All right. And then with a big sponge, you are going to wipe down the wheel. You're going to wipe everything down the deck. And the best way to get this baby clean is to take it apart like I said. You're going to pop these open. See, look how much water I have in there. It's not too much that I'm going to spill it all over the place. But I'm going to take these over to the sink. And before I do that, you're going to do a clean sweep to make sure you don't have chunks of clay in there. And this water can go down the sink. These can be rinsed off. You're going to wipe everything down with a sponge, put it all back together. If you're using the wheel for trimming, you're going to have pieces of trim in there. Those sometimes go on the floor. You need to sweep those up before you leave. Sweep it up lightly so as not to stir up dust in the studio. Those cannot go into the clay barrel if they've been on the floor. If there's scraps in the bucket, you can put those in the barrel or whatever, but anything on the floor goes in the garbage. And you can sweep it up with a sponge or a paper towel or lightly with the broom, but to leave those scraps on the floor, they will dry out, get stepped on, and turn to powder, and we don't want that. That would be anytime we're working in the studio. We want to kind of get the clay scrap picked up.